I'm Hamish Black, and this is Writing on Games. The term emotional experience, used when referring to games, is something that I have trouble with. Whenever I hear it, whether it be from reviewers who lack the critical capacity to explain what emotions the game is attempting to extract from the player, or publishers and developers who are trying to market their game to a specific audience, I think back to those ridiculous times around the late 2000s where every game was referred to as a cinematic experience, and I cringe just as hard as I did back then. It's a shorthand that at best explains nothing, and at worst signifies that a game is going to be incredibly heavy-handed in its attempts to elicit that coveted single tear from the person playing it. I should say that I am far from one of these people that thinks that games should eschew narrative altogether and just focus on being all fun all the time. Quite the opposite. I love games that exude effective narrative delivery, or more generally, I enjoy worthwhile artistic works of any medium. And therein lies my point. As stated in other videos on this channel, games, due to their relative youth as a medium, have consistently and desperately tried to equate themselves to other media, saying, "Look at me, I'm just like a movie," or "My narrative is based on a book, therefore it's automatically hot shit." My point is that games, whilst we still require a critical language to be developed that is truly our own, shorthand like emotional experience really brings nothing to the table, and only serves to perpetuate the idea that games are still trying to catch up to other media. In what world would a book or film be referred to as an emotional experience? What emotion is it you're trying to elicit from me as a player? There are lots of emotions, you guys. When you use the term emotional experience, the only emotion I feel is fucking indifference. Let's examine this idea further. When games are referred to as emotional experiences, to what games are people referring, and what emotions, in all seriousness, are these people talking about? Usually this term is used to describe smaller indie games, or bigger AAA games that are trying to cash in on that sweet indie dev cash pit. David Cage constantly speaks of his games, which for the most part are considered to be interesting, if majorly flawed experiments with storytelling in games, as emotional experiences, to the point where it has become a phrase he doesn't even think about anymore. In an interview with Eurogamer in 2013, he spoke of his game Beyond Two Souls and stated that, "We want to use the camera to say something. If we're talking about emotional experience through storytelling, you need cameras to have a sense of emotion. What's interesting is this is something cinema did a century ago or less with Citizen Kane. He used the camera to tell a story and not just to show the story. That was hugely inspiring to filmmakers, and that's where we are with games now." What the fuck does any of that mean? That means quite literally fuck all. It's either cases like that, where developers spout meaningless, pretentious, and I actually mean pretentious in the truest sense, nonsense about their own games, or it's reviewers speaking of games like Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons or Journey. Journey, I should say, is one of my favourite games, but we'll get onto Brothers right now. Reviews from outlets like GameZone, Polygon and GameSpot all referred to Brothers as this nebulous, emotional experience and heaped praise upon praise on it as a result. Now, I'm probably going to get lynched for this, but I was severely disappointed by Brothers, and whilst I generally don't give a shit about how highly other people rate games, people can like what they like, but seeing the praise heaped upon this game when I found there to be severe issues with pacing, mechanics and the heavy-handedness of the narrative in general, for some reason made me feel away. You could say I had an emotional experience. What were my problems with this game exactly? Well, the first and probably most prominent of my problems with the game came with the way it handled mechanics as narrative. The idea that the narrative of the game is delivered through the way in which you, the player, interact with and control the experience. This is not to say that games cannot do this effectively, quite the opposite. There are many examples of this done well, some that I will come on to later, and experiments with this have been prevalent since gaming began. For a breakdown of this, I implore you to check out Extra Credits episode on narrative mechanics and Missile Command. That game is unbelievable in its narrative depth and delivery. What happens when you fundamentally break this, however? Well, as I would argue, a game like Brothers happens. Now, this is all down to personal opinion, and feel free to disagree with me and discuss this idea with me, but the key component of the game, and the source of every puzzle and enemy encounter in the game, is that one player controls both characters simultaneously with one controller. Both sticks and shoulder buttons correspond to both brothers. The thought that pervaded my entire experience with this game as a result was as follows. Are these brothers fucking morons? The idea was clearly that the player had to view these brothers as one and the same, and the clumsiness that came as a result of controlling both of these brothers at the same time, like I say, is the key component of every puzzle in the game. That said, they don't literally share the same brain, do they? As I was having to coordinate moving the brothers away from danger, and I'd accidentally run into a wall with one of them as I moved my focus to one brother in particular, only for the other brother to either keep running into a wall or stand still and await death. The only real emotion it elicited from me was hysteria. as I laughed at the idea of this wee prick just standing there as a monster approached him, and the brothers shouting, "Get the fuck out of the way!" before remembering that they were, in fact, both morons, and that this was probably natural selection at work. This was my main problem with the game. The idea that if it were a two-player game, then that would counteract any dissonance created by the fundamental mechanics, but it would also remove any of the challenge from the game. This idea, to me anyway, fundamentally broke the experience. I obviously get what they were going for, the idea that these brothers have a figuratively symbiotic relationship, but the mechanics make it out as if their relationship is literally symbiotic, which is a big problem. The heavy-handedness of the symbolism of the narrative, look, they're essentially one and the same person, also correlated, in my mind anyway, with the hokey narrative itself. If you went into this experience at any point thinking that both brothers were going to make it out alive after the game smacking you in the face with the idea that this story is sad time and time again, then your IQ is probably within the single digits. It should have come as a surprise to no one, and therefore it elicited none of the tears from this particular player that it clearly wanted to drain from my eyes with vampiric enthusiasm. My point? Well, just because a game is emotional does not automatically make that game effective. And when people refer to games as emotional experiences, what they typically mean is that a game is sad, and this usually involves a close relative or friend of the player character kicking the bucket at some point in the story. What I've been trying to get at through this entire piece is that emotion is so much more than that. Look at a game like Journey, for instance. As previously stated, this is another game people constantly refer to as an emotional experience, but this is totally meaningless, as the wealth of emotion that game elicits from the player is not done justice by that phrase. My most memorable experience with that game was welling up at the famous sliding scene. This is not a sad scene, in fact it is quite triumphant. The fluid movement makes the player feel empowered, and the idea that you can be experiencing this with another player whom you do not know, combined with the side-on angle as you pass the mountain and the absolutely gorgeous lighting, it's an experience that I'll probably never forget, and to boil that down to simply an emotional experience feels unbelievably reductive to me. Visceral excitement from the movement, anxiety and curiosity as to what will come next in this world, courage as you and your companion feel like you can take on anything in the world, mixed with a subtle remorse and sadness as you remember that you and your companion are alone in what is hinted to be a former bustling metropolis. This is just one example of many set pieces that permeate the experience, and all deliver equally conflicting emotions. To simply describe the game as emotional then, is to do the game a grand disservice. Developers, publishers and reviewers eschew this reductive language, begin to develop a critical language that allows us to examine these emotions in depth, and why and how they are elicited from the player, rather than just stopping at the word emotions. Don't think that emotional just means sad. Don't believe that the shortcut to emotions in games is just killing off characters. Think about the mechanics of the games you play and create, and the ways in which the fundamentals of these mechanics can potentially interrupt and cause dissonance with the ideas you are trying to present with them. Critical thought at every part of the process is key. And last but not least, get to fuck David Cage, you mad weirdo. Fahrenheit, more like Fahrenshite. And on that bombshell, I'm Hamish Black, and this has been Writing on Games. I'll see you next time.